Now, this report is going to be, or this segment is going to be linking two different things. One, we talk about in a earlier segment in this particular episode, but also we're also going to talk about in addition to this particular link that we talked about, which is particularly the DOJ whistleblower. We're going to talk about the IRS and a particularly worrisome system that they're developing to share data with just with ICE, but just the government in general. And this idea and this I think the whistleblower, right, and the whistleblower himself, he sheds light on this pressure to ignore laws in general, right? Very important. And in case you are unaware or disillusioned in any way, among the many other lies from this guy or about this guy, Elon is not a genius. He is not motivated or competent enough to perform the audit that he is promising, right? The main product that Elon sells is his image. That is it. He's not an engineering wonder in any case. You need to understand that. And he's not like just some kind of like multifaceted genius. In fact, if you heard this guy speak and you know anything about, or you have any type of specialization in anything he talks about, and he just kind of like just says on his platform, you realize very quickly, like, oh, this guy's actually not that smart. He doesn't have really, maybe, and you probably still don't understand that he's not that smart in how many of the ideas that he talks about, even on a regular basis. But this idea of the audit in general, it was performative, right? And I want you guys to really see something, that this idea, Elon and a lot of people in this administration that kind of like stand in, the spotlight in a lot of cases, they just don't appear to be like deep state competent actors. That's not the extent of how this goes, right? Because Palantir is involved. Okay? When we, in terms of like what's happening today, it seems, and there is, to me, I would say, likely a deep state sanctioned pressure that's allowing, and that is in alignment with what is taking place, right? When we talk about the chaos today, or from Doge in general, I think there's an example that I've been bringing up a lot this particular episode, but this concept of J. Edgar Hoover, right? This was essentially, this guy was the head of FBI for 48 years, right? And various presidents, both left and right, wanted to fire J. Edgar Hoover, right? Hoover was too deeply entrenched for this to take place. Now, this idea of the media, the left-leaning media, saying that these like 20-something-year-olds and or teenagers are somehow like, these Reddit incel people are somehow goons. You know what I'm saying? Like, something's not right here. This doesn't sound believable, at least to me, I'll say, right? And this idea of the firing taking place, we may be looking at a very large step towards 1984, right? For those that haven't read the book and don't really know about the book, please read it. Now, I don't want to call this the beginning of 1984 because we got 9/11 and we got the COVID stuff, right? Because these particular events, I think we can view them as major players in this league, because, and even with Hoover himself, he had a more historical role in this idea of creating the mass surveillance state. And Hoover and his activities got called out after his death by this Frank Church committee, right? And with the more recent example with Edward Snowden, he blew the whistle on really what took place after 9/11. Now, considering how Edward Snowden is still wanted for violating the Espionage Act, it's hard not to believe that Big Brother didn't go off the rails again with COVID, because I want you guys to understand, we didn't have our Edward Snowden of COVID. That didn't happen. That didn't take place, right? We're not seeing any major whistleblowers come out, and we're not seeing any congressional understanding of what happened. We're just kind of hearing, some yells about it, but that was it. Now, as I said before, Elon, I don't view him as a competent person. I don't view him as somebody who is able to just create and contribute to the deep state, or the deep state. Am I saying that right? The deep state? Yeah, deep state. Okay, but the idea here is that his friends Alex Karp and Peter Thiel, they are competent, and the interview with Peter Thiel, it kind of sheds light on the idea that this guy may actually be a conscious enemy of humanity and freedom in general. And considering the history of the company the company that Alex Karp and Peter Thiel have, right, Palantir, it isn't a stretch to imagine that the CIA mentored them quite well, right? And this administration, the idea of coming in and disrupting the system or whatever the clown show's going on, this may be essentially this may be helping to put a cap on a lot of this whole total surveillance thing, right? And regardless of this particular theater show, you need to understand that this is not business as usual. And our government, right, the Republicans are definitely complicit on another, I'll say in their own special way, but our government has failed us. That is extremely important that people understand. And this particular article that I'm linking, ProPublica, is highlighting how the IRS is building a computer database, right? There's this guy, DeMello, they put him in place as the acting general counsel at the IRS, right? When I say they, I mean the Trump administration put this guy in place, but they then fired him because he denied ICE essentially this request for 7.3 million taxpayer addresses, right? He was put in place by replacing the last guy. So this idea of him actually having to be fired is worrisome, because this request that he denied, you need to understand that the IRS, they get about maybe like a little over a dozen address requests for, essentially people who are being under criminal investigation. They'll receive a request address. And the idea here is that they want the most recent address that, they filed under for the IRS, right? This, like, they requested 7.3 million addresses at once, when the IRS only gets a little over a dozen very rarely. It didn't make sense, and this guy that they put in place said that this request had multiple legal quote-unquote deficiencies, right? When I say this is not business as usual, I'm not talking about just business as usual with just every single administration. I'm talking about business. This is not business as usual, even by the standards of the first administration for Trump, right? This particular DOJ, the DOJ whistleblower, I'll link the particular article or the particular video there too. This guy speaks a similar tune, right? Because he worked in Trump's first agency and he didn't see any real red lights like this administration, right? Because they were after foreigners in a certain way, and he was still skeptical of a lot of things, but they still followed the law. That wasn't like a thing that he had to worry about in the first administration. That was just business. It was not to say that it wasn't unprecedented, but it still was to a degree business as usual in terms of dealing with the courts. Now, with this particular administration, he heard talks about ignoring court orders that really raised some red flags, and he was essentially after it was about, I think, the planes taking off to El Salvador or something like that. They were saying, hey, these planes need to go in the sky no matter what, or something like that, and even if there's a court order denying that. And that was a problem. But at some point, this guy Kilmore Abrego Garcia came out, because for some reason, this is not to say that this definitely isn't notable in terms of having a figurehead, period, but it is interesting that we kind of skipped over the idea of, the guy who was essentially jailed for speaking out about just what's going on in terms of Palestine. That is pretty interesting that we turned this guy into the figurehead. But eventually, this guy in particular, he got questioned about Kilmore Abrego Garcia, right? And they completely this administration, thank God for this, that they're incompetent, but it's still a problem. It was still a problem, right? This particular idea, what happened here is he had to be labeled as a terrorist to justify the handling of this case, and the whistleblower wasn't going to just outright lie and just say that there was reasonable cause for him to be for him to be labeled as a terrorist. And he was let go. He was fired. And he noted cases to where his boss had to essentially just sign for documents and in place of him, and where it was essentially a lie. It was definitely something that was not something that you'd expect. And in the IRS there would have had to been criminal investigations to justify every address that you shared with ICE, right? And the IRS, this idea of receiving 7.3 million requests, there was no way. There was just no, like, you're not going to tell me that we get a little bit over a dozen and now all of a sudden there's 7.3 million addresses. It's a problem. And these guys, they fired the guy working at the IRS now. We're looking at people in place, which, I mean, honestly, after this is done, they all need to go down with this administration, or assuming that this gets resolved and we still have a civil society or whatever, they all need to go down with this administration, right? I'm talking about every single person that signed those documents, the lawyers that lied under oath and all that stuff, they all need to go down. This doesn't need to be like one or two. This needs to be an entire the entire system that that was loyal to this clown. But in terms of this right here, this particular system, I think is noteworthy in terms of it really steps us up for Big Brother, because they want to make mass request more possible. They want to make that easier. And this particular request, just for the 7.3 million addresses, this is something that the courts decided was legal, and they said, hey, you can do this, you can interpret the law like this. But they didn't. It's important to note, like, one, I'm not holding my breath for the court system. I truly believe there needs to be real reform is going to require those clowns to get moved too. But the idea here is that they are clearly pushing the bounds of law, but this, I want to, that wasn't what I meant. I meant the idea here of the court system. It's important to understand that they haven't ruled on this particular system that's being put in place and it's being engineered right now. So while I have no faith, or not no faith, I'll say little faith in the court system, there is something to note that they haven't completely failed us. And let me not completely throw them under the bus. There may be some form of moral grounding that some of these guys uphold, which may be something. And they haven't completely given in to every single thing with Trump, which is nice, but I still do believe it needs reform. And when it comes down to this particular system, it works by basically taking a spreadsheet from ICE that has just the taxpayer name and some previous address and information or whatever, and then it provides this identification number. Now, if the spreadsheet that ICE provides is matched to a person, then the courts would come up with the most recent, of course the personal identification, but also the most recent address, which is more prevalent in terms of this particular case. But the problem with this system is how it can be expanded, and how easily it can be expanded to everyone, right, to all citizens. And Trump is already kind of talking about shipping U.S. citizens off to El Salvador or whatever, to some kind of Alcatraz camp or whatever. This is something, and it can also be expanded to to what information that it provides people. So, like, you can have employers. You can also have things like your family members on that list, and we gotta really be understanding of how how much this can impact and strengthen the quality of a total surveillance net when you really need it. And like I need really people to understand that this is the government failing us, right? This is a consistent pattern of government failing us. If you graded the government on a scale, then they would have failed us consistently. Without audit, without, any need to reform itself, it has been failing. And this administration is a very unique failure, but they're definitely taking it up a notch, at least one notch. This response, we can't let it be some kind of like, oh, we're just gonna put the Democrats in power and they're gonna take control of everything and we can kind of go back to sleep. That can't be the response. That can't be how things are done, right? They'll the Democrats will argue and complain about how hard it is to follow the rules and how they really can't do anything. Their hands are tied. These aren't people that it's a lot of this, a significant portion of this is theater, right? There may be some politicians in there that maybe believe in what they're doing and in this particular system or whatever, but I want to let you guys know the people who are in power, who have the power, the networks, the relationships to do something about anything, they're not doing anything. They're not going to do anything, and regardless of who's in power. And this is, like I said, a step towards this is a step towards total surveillance, and we need to understand that. And this administration, I want how far they've gotten, how far they've gotten so far, can really only be I would say can really be best explained by being deep state sanctioned behavior, right? Because Trump is looking like the opposite, the polar opposite to JFK. That's why he's able to get so far.